hungry.
Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Friday. It is hotline time. I'm back from squatching in the Pacific Northwest. It was a beautiful time, but I'm back from vacation. It's Friday. It's hotline time. We're live on LinkedIn. We're live on YouTube. You can find us at CUIHotline.org. Let's see if I remember everything. You can call the number. You can fill out the form. You can add your questions in chat. We got a huge backlog of questions, as we always do. Lots of questions through unofficial forum discussions that have occurred over the last days and weeks during this wonderful time of suspension around the CMMC program. And we'll go through as many of them we can and see what comes up. Daniel, I was out. I was out, but I couldn't help but tune in for like a little bit of.
I was about to say, out is a loose term with the level of participation we were seeing over the last couple of weeks.
No, it's just we did a 2,800-mile road trip, so I had a lot of time to think, and I needed to give the family a break, so I had to tune in on Friday just to let it rip for a little bit. Otherwise, they were gonna leave me by the side of the road.
I love it. Oh man,
amazing! All right, well,
I'll be back, by the way. So
thanks. Well, let's get into your week in review here. In case everybody hadn't heard, because it wasn't very well advertised, the DoD CIO is conducting listening sessions in places that are full of defense contractors, such as BlackHat in Las Vegas, or apparently online, which I had never even heard that there was going to be an online listening session. These were unrecorded, off the record, no record whatsoever of what was said or asked. But, you know, the way that the world works, people let us know what was being said and asked at some of these things. So what do you think here?
I mean, there's a few things as you kind of like go down the list, because there's been a lot of conversations, right? First off, out of the gate, DFAR 7012 is too expensive. They in reality say CMMC is too expensive, right? That's the language that they're using. Assessments being too costly, but at the same time, I was talking to Fernando on the podcast I just did with him, and he's like, no, we actually showed up with information here to show what we're quoting and actively selling, like small businesses. It's like, it's not $400,000, $500,000, $600,000.
They showed up with actual receipts.
Yeah, redacted invoices. Here you go. Here's proof. And people all around the table did the same. So,
and the statement from Fernando apparently that the busiest C3PAO has never turned a company away due to scheduling constraints ever.
Which is, so there's that. There's FedRAMP / GovCloud is too expensive. But when you pop the hood on that, a follow-up question was asked, well, do you have ITAR data? And they're like, well, yeah, I have ITAR data. It's like, okay, well, FedRAMP's not your burden here. It's like you're probably having to go with those providers because of the U.S. person and data,
which you would have to do before CMMC existed.
Yep.
Whether they change the name of CMMC to something else, those are separate requirements.
Yep. Some of the other very fun things. It takes a lot of effort to do this. That was a fun little summarized bullet point here of multiple people saying it's just a lot of work. Certain MSPs locked companies out of their own enclave. We saw that happen with the company formerly known as Neo Systems. Had some issues on that side of the house.
Is that CMMC's fault?
Not CMMC's fault. No. And that's the crazy part. Going down this list, I'm like looking at like major bullet points, and I'm like, hey, like, you know, and then we have the other side of the house where it's like the CIO talking about wanting continuous assessments, wanting to integrate with Rev 3, still wanting to maintain. This was one of the best things that we heard was at one of the listening sessions. She's basically asked the question, would you continue to allow self-assessments? And she's like, let me show you this. And it was the average score of a compromised or cyber event happening organization, and their self-attestation score is like 109, the average of organizations that are compromised. And it's like, I don't trust this self thing. It obviously is not working for us, right? So the more I hear about this from, this is the third or fourth kind of conversation around RFIs or the CIO listening rooms that people have been a part of in masses. Like, I'm starting to see where, like, the CIO is saying security is really important, and I don't trust the DIB to do the right thing. Now, maybe we consolidate documentation and make it simpler. Maybe we fund assessments to help offset some costs for small business. And hey, with VAR CUI, we do reciprocity with Rev 3. We come into Unity there. Same thing with Cirxia. Like, we just try and find these bridges so you don't have to, double, triple down on things. But I'm not seeing any world where she's backing off of requirements for certifications.
And this is, I don't know if they're watching because they got RFI responses to go through, but you have to say that into the microphone. Where was all of that 3 weeks ago when you guys came out and demonized everything about external assessments and dunked on the fact that the requirements are stupid and don't work and tweeted ridiculous, like insane videos about blowing up bureaucracy, only to then stand up like multi-tiered review task forces full of career government SES officials? And it's like, what? We were talking about this before the show. The thing I am the most excited to see is how they thread the needle out of this corner that they have painted themselves into 60 to 75 days after they made this announcement, because they came out guns blazing, being like, this is ridiculous. Duffy is out here saying that CMMC is nothing more than peacetime paperwork. I'm like, buddy, you worked in the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering office when Sea Dragon was compromised. You know that there is a flaw in the DoD's policy where DFAR 7012, regardless of what the requirements are, has zero ability to prove to you that contractors are meeting the requirement. That's the whole point. And now they go out to these listening sessions and they're like, we want the requirements to be higher. We want the assessments to be more often. We want the assessments to be more stringent. And it's like, how are you going to, I don't disagree. I think that's wonderful, but you're the one that came out and said that this is a ridiculous red tape bureaucratic burden of nonsense.
Part of me, in looking at the political dance that this is, part of me is like, do you make that big splash in the pond in conjunction with SBA to try and strong arm Congress to fund more efforts for small business in your budget, so that then you can be like, hey, big issue, supply chain, we're going to war with Iran still, we need weapons, we need the small supplier, give us money to help them. And on the other side, since they know the money might be coming in, again, through the big splash effort, saying, yeah, like, I'm happy the money's coming in because I actually want to demand more out of the supply chain, but I'm going to give them a way where they don't have to complain about it, which is we're going to subsidize them to some point. Like, maybe I think they're playing this both and type strategy. I think, I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe there is a master plan here, but it's Hanlon's razor. If you guys are familiar with Hanlon's razor, that's the vibe that I'm getting here. And like you were saying, there's a real problem here, because the pattern that we have warned people about year after year is that when you ask the government to open the door for what the government thinks the right answer is, no one ever likes their answer. Keeping things gray and non-specific gives you the wiggle room in order to go with the answer that you think is correct. When you ask for specificity, which ironically is the bureaucracy that everybody loves to hate, you get constrained into the government's idea of what correct is. That's why you have to do SSPs. The government never originally required SSPs, right?
Nope.
That's why you got to do FedRAMP. That was never the original requirement, right? So now the problem is, in my view, because people have refused to split hairs between DFAR 7012 requirements and CMMC assessment, that has opened the door very clearly in the RFI responses and what the DoD CIO is saying for them to leverage a suspension of the CMMC program to revisit the requirements. That is not how that is supposed to work. That is not in the scope of the CMMC program, but we live in interesting times, and people are going to, if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile.
Yep.
The problem is that everyone assumed that the lady who was a Fortune 500 CISO for most of her career, who comes from a world of millions, tens of millions, if not more, security budgets annually, will think that a 10-year-old, hyper-tailored, hyper-scoped, narrow baseline of requirements is too high of a standard, and that the new requirements should be lower than that. Do you think that Kirsten Davies thinks that 800-171 goes too far? Or do you think that she thinks it doesn't go far enough? If you want to know what she thinks, go look at the basics. It talks about OT requirements. All she talks about is OT requirements. So you can go ahead and shred the scoping guide that saved everybody a ton of money, because apparently she wants OT to be in scope. The very first suggestion, because these are not requirements yet, is phishing resistant MFA. If you did not watch the Sum It Up podcast this week, please go watch it, because phishing resistant MFA wouldn't have even been possible to be in 800-171 until maybe 171 revision 4. If Davies were able to wave a magic wand, that would be the requirement right now. And there are, CAC cards, web auth passkeys, FIDO2 keys. That's it. Those are the only MFA solutions that you can use to meet that potential future requirement. So when people are struggling to meet 800-171 Rev 2 and blaming it on CMMC, the lady who maybe doesn't really understand the intricacies of how all these regulations work together is going to use that as an opportunity to then accelerate requirements beyond 171 revision 3.
Yep.
Be careful what you wish for, because there is zero chance that the DoD CIO wants less than what's in 171 revision 2. Back to my point, how are you going to explain your way out of this when you just said that cost is the problem? Because when you look at the basics, they're way more expensive and complicated than even 171 revision 3. I have no idea how they're going to explain it. From our perspective, sure, you want to run continuous 24/7 automated assessments? Great. People get to spend less money on C3PAOs. They're going to have to spend that money on your new requirements. You think that the companies that can't implement even vanilla MFA know anything about phishing resistant MFA? You think that when people talk about machine readable documentation, the average DIBS subcontractor that we're talking about here knows what machine readable even means, right? Yeah. Like, it is, they're not, there's a Big Lebowski quote that I won't repeat here, but I'm sure you guys know it. They're not wrong. These guys are not wrong about what they want to do, but I got my popcorn ready. I cannot wait to see how they explain their way out of this.
I think they're just talking to two very different audiences. I think the big splash in the pond was like Congress. Like, we've heard from your constituents, everything's too expensive. We want some more money from you to help with this. And on the backside, they're like, because we anticipate more money coming in to help these guys, we're maybe going to lift the bar a little bit, you know? I mean, and it's like, I don't know. We'll see.
To the RFI responses. It's like, every time we did a whole podcast on this, every time you talk about the requirements that are outside of CMMC, that's a different undersecretary's office that would have to go through rulemaking. So Mr. Duffy hates bureaucracy, apparently, even though he's worked in the bureaucracy his entire career. Apparently, he's very excited to go through DFAR 7012 rulemaking, because everything they're talking about would be his office's responsibility. But I didn't see him at BlackHat, so I don't know. I don't know. Here's a great question. Oh, man. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? I remember, gather around, children. I remember back in the day when they suspended CMMC 1.0 and a humble little YouTube channel said, you know what's probably going to happen? They're probably going to come back and say, wow, we don't have a mechanism for assurance in DFAR 7012, So you need to implement the same requirements that you did before the suspension, and we're still going to come assess you. And what happened? CMMC 2.0 got announced, and it was do 800-171. We're going to come assess you. Took a long time to get through rulemaking, but that's what they did. I have a feeling that they're going to say you need to do at least 800-171, and we're going to come assess you. So the question, could phase 2 come back exactly as written after the review? I have a feeling that we're going to rename the program and maybe change a couple of diagrams, like literally just not call it CMMC anymore, call it Kirsten Davies Magical Christmas Land Assessment Process for Resiliency and Security. Is that an acronym, everybody in chat? What does that spell? I don't know. We'll work on the acronym.
Cybersecurity Continuous Model Certification. Maybe we take out an M instead of
Continuous Monitoring Matters for cybersecurity.
Yeah.
I have a strong feeling that whatever happens after the review is going to look eerily similar to what you have already seen, because the same policy problem exists regardless of what you call the problem, and the same policy issues are being brought up in the RFI responses. I know I talk about this rulemaking history over and over again, but the big question here when you read these responses: cost, business burden, alternative methods of assessment, assessment before bidding, at award, post award, all of these issues have been brought up ad nauseum in public comments in different eras of rulemaking, from ANS, from the CIO, from DFAR 7012 through CMMC, even through 32 CFR 2002, the federal CUI regulation, and the same policy answers come out every time. Yes, it's more expensive on a relative basis to meet a minimum baseline if you're small versus if you're big.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that the minimum baseline is inherently oppressive to small businesses. That means it's expensive to be small on a relative basis. That's how economies of scale work. Does that justify a different baseline based off company size? No. Does that justify a different standard for POAMs for companies based off of their size? Apparently not. So this is what we talked about during the last rulemaking. When you submit the same comments on rules around the same policy questions, what you're actually saying is this time the department will change their policy position. But the department just established this policy position again less than 2 years ago. So if you're a betting person, do you think that they're going to change their policy position based off their PR rhetoric or not? I don't think they are.
I'm going to crystal ball this thing for just a minute. I think FAR CUI comes out. I think this SFXXX form,
which will have a number, by the way. The triple X thing is just a placeholder.
I think phase 2 comes back as is, but there's an internal gate for contracting officers to only apply level 2 self or cert based on if an SF document is present.
There you go.
On that side.
There you go.
It's kind of the mirroring of the best of both. It's like, we don't want to thrust a requirement down that's not needed. To keep ourselves accountable that it's needed, we have to provide this form.
Yep.
Right. And so it's kind of the ultimate, I say ultimate fix, in the sense of a solicitation can't go out unless there's an understanding of what CUI will be on there, meaning there will have to be an SFXXX document as part of that. And then that is kind of the guiding rule based on the CUI categories, which I have a feeling defense level CUI will probably require certification, like we saw in the memo that was published over a year ago now, and that other CUI categories will allow self-attestation. I'm going to crystal ball and say I would not doubt if phase 2 came back as is with that one modification that's going to be inherited from FAR CUI.
I'll do one even better. I got the email ready because I sent this exact email to Kirsten Davies in January. I got the receipts. I'll do you one even better. Revise DFAR 7012 to say it is only included when SFXXX positively indicates that there is CUI. Because remember, like building off your idea here, right? DFAR 7012 is prescribed to go into all contracts by default to protect the agency. Remember, everybody, that was a suggestion from public comments, by the way. That wasn't the DoD's idea. So, maybe take a look in the mirror here. 7012 goes into all contracts by default. CUI does not go into all contracts by default. Therefore, it's on you to negotiate out of your contracts, which you typically cannot do for lots of reasons. It exists in your contracts. You attest to doing it. So then years later, people show up and say they want proof. You're like, well, we never had any CUI. And they go, well, we can't prove that, but you said you were doing it. Too bad, so sad. So go through DFAR 7012 rulemaking, which the DoD CIO does not control, and say you only include this clause when you have checked the box on SFXXX. Done. Easy. What's the problem? Very, very easy. Not a big deal. Other issues in DFAR 7012 are other issues. Not part of the CMMC program, everybody. They could go do that right now. There is nothing stopping them. They have had the DFAR 7012 rule revision pending in review inside the ANS office for 3 years. 3 years they haven't made any progress on it, right? This is all Duffy's responsibility. This isn't Davy's responsibility. So very easy policy solution within the confines of rulemaking. But when you hate the bureaucracy, then you don't always come up with ideas like that. So, all righty.
Wild times.
If they won't supply an SCG, why would they supply an SFXXX? Because the FAR CUI rule
contractual obligations. Yeah.
The FAR CUI rule mandates that you fill out that form. The FAR CUI rule no rule mandates that you provide the security classification guide. But that's why the FAR CUI rule is such a big deal, is because if nothing else, it doesn't really affect defense contractors because DFAR 7012 already exists. That standard form is for all agencies. And so the thing that everybody is always asking and blaming on CMMC is, do I have the CUI or not? The form tells you, yes, you have the CUI. Preferably, the form says you have the following forms of CUI. But then we're going to get right back in the same problem of that form goes from the government to the prime. There's nothing about that form that keeps the prime from turning around and saying, go get level 2 or level 8 or whatever.
Pick a level.
Whatever they're going to pick after the review, right?
Well, so I'm gonna go back on this for a second. So I don't know if I did this while you were gone or not. I looked at the FAR CUI public comments, and I think there were 86, 87 total comments. 10 of those were, can we just have an extension, more time to write our
public comment period extension? Yeah,
that's right. But I'm looking at them, and the one ask, and this was by Allison at Wintech, she was like, hey, can we have it so they can't put every type of CUI on the SFXXX form? Because it kind of comes back to there's another mechanism where they could just do CUIA and say, hey, covered defense information / like DFAR 7012 and anything else in the NAR registry is applicable to this FXXX form. So like, it's funny because there could be another blanket, hey, we consider everything on behalf of this contract CUI if it has some sort of statute in existing CUI registry, right? Like, it's crazy. I think that form could easily be abused by every agency if they wanted it to be, because there doesn't seem to be a lot of guardrails there. Now, maybe in the final version, they'll take Allison's comment to heart and try and put like limiters on it to some extent or justifications, but like,
well,
I doubt it.
Back to Duffy, back to the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment. That GAO report on CMMC came out not that long ago, and the only part that anybody wanted to talk about, the only part that anybody wrote a headline about was in the theoretical situation where there aren't enough assessors, the DoD doesn't have a good plan for what to do, even though they have waivers for that exact situation. And there's way more assessors than the industry can possibly handle right now. So this is a total non-issue. The part people didn't talk about was the part that said the CMMC program office created all of the training for the acquisition workforce to undergo, and the Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment has yet to make it mandatory, so they don't know what they're doing, so they're just shotgunning out CMMC requirements that don't correspond to the data involved with the contract. Doesn't that seem like what everyone is complaining about in the RFI? Isn't that the primary issue out there. And no one has a problem with Duffy coming out and being like, oh, CMMC sure is dumb. I'd be like, it's your fault, buddy. This is your problem. These people work for you. Why isn't the training mandatory? Because you come out with the SFXXX form, and then all of a sudden they're like, okay, everything is CUI because Duffy didn't make the training required. Like, I mean, it was right there in the same report. Yeah. That's by far the bigger issue. It's just crazy. It's just insane. But yeah, could it come back exactly as written? It could come back exactly as written. I have a feeling they're going to change the name. They're going to call it whatever, and they're going to say that it's Crystal CMMC. It's like CMMC. We're not like a regular assurance program. We're a cool assurance program. There's no rules in this house. All right. Can prime contractors still require C3 PAO assessments from subcontractors? You just had a conversation with a prime on this exact topic.
I did. And short answer is yes. And not only that, but primes, even in this interim period, are looking to give priority to people with third-party validation and certification because it minimizes their risk. All this is to them is a risk play. If it's not a contractual obligation, okay, that's one thing. But like the other side of it is like, I at least now know you can handle this data because you've been independently verified, right? And so there was also some talk in these listening room session things where maybe some special treatment would be given, at least from a scorecard perspective, to existing solicitations, where it's like, hey, if you are certified, we will give you an extra 10 points on the criteria, the scoring criteria for a contract award. And I'm like, I like that. Even in the interim, people who have gotten certified, they at least get to leverage some sort of advantage. So I know the CIO spoke about that at one of the listening town hall things. It'd be interesting to see if and when that happens and how much they're going to weight people with a certification, right, as part of the eligibility for contract award. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. It's a good fix in the interim for sure.
I would love it. I would love it if the DoD CIO would say, well, we'll give you points if you meet the minimum standard, but we won't give you any extra points if you meet the brilliant at the basic standard, and then watch how many people don't meet the brilliant at the basic standard.
Right.
Maybe things are different in the Fortune 500 world, but in this world, if it ain't a requirement, people aren't going to do it. People just won't do it. I don't know how to tell you, but that's how it works. So your photographs at the manufacturing plants that you went to look really great, but apparently you didn't ask them the question, would you do security if it weren't required?
People seemingly, and maybe I don't want to broad stroke too much, but I've talked to probably like 8, 9, 10,000 defense contractors, just a ton of them. And small business specifically don't seem to value the integrity of data and sometimes their own IP when you hear how things are configured or stored. And so, like, I get working for a Fortune 500, Fortune 1000, Fortune 5000 company, right? Fill in the blank of medium and large sizes, because you have an understanding of the data that I have is genuinely valuable and truly considered an asset. And that is put at risk if I don't have good cyber posture, right? And I think the hard part that the DOW might not fully understand is the large portion of the DIB being small and medium businesses haven't reached that threshold of seeing enough value in their data to consider it an asset worth mitigating risk against. Yeah. And so I think that's the hard part, is like a risk mitigation program doesn't exist unless you probably are in the Fortune Club, right? Of some sort, 5,000, 10,000, whatever. Like,
I mean, you see this all the time whenever the comments come in. From the DoD's perspective, they're like, the value of the weapon system and the supply chain is hundreds of billions, if not more. Yeah. The cost of complying with these requirements is fractions of a penny versus the value of this capability. But then when you talk to the businesses in the supply chain, they go, the cost of compliance is more than I make. And so that's the problem. That's the economics problem that you can't get around. So are you going to continue to talk around the idea of whittling down the standard such that it is affordable for the least capable people in the supply chain? Are you going to keep the loophole open and just never ask anybody to prove it, which is effectively the same thing? Or are you going to come up with some sort of policy solution to this fundamental economics problem? Because Vanilla MFA has been the #2 most commonly not implemented requirement, and that's been the same requirement for 10 years. It ain't a time problem. It ain't a cost problem. It's not an understanding problem. It's not a technology availability problem. It's an economics problem. Period. All right, let's see here. Which parts of CMMC are most likely to change after the task force review? I don't know. I mean, it's hard to know at this point because we did the podcast on the RFI. The RFI asks about a ton of stuff that is not within the scope of CMMC. So I don't know what part of CMMC they would possibly change. It's also hard to know what part of CMMC they would change because anything that they were going to change would require rulemaking. So like they haven't, nobody involved in this process has said we're going to collect these responses in order to get ready for rulemaking, because that would effectively be give us public comments before we ask for public comments again, right? Like I haven't heard any of these people say we're going to do additional rulemaking. So if they wanted to change any part, like how do you plan to do that?
I think it's just like, hey, we're just going to point to FAR CUI, and I think we're going to point to CERC-CIA, and we're going to come with a unified approach. But the problem is scoping guidance in, DFAR 7021. The problem is the different CMMC levels. The main problem, if they could wave a wand right now, here's what I think that they would do. Like of a minimal yet significant impact, they would change the number of allowable POAM items. Sure. I think broad stroke, to lessen the immediate impact on smaller businesses, they would allow a larger runway to either resolve issues or to have a little bit of a longer list that you can then remediate within that 6-month window. But to your point, Jacob, that's rulemaking. That's codified in the rule.
It's not only is it rulemaking, but it's also a question of, okay, you lower the POAM standard. There's still going to be tens of thousands of companies that say that is still too burdensome of a requirement. Are you willing to say that even with a lower standard, we will not award contracts to people who can't meet the standard? Yes or no? It's like, it doesn't really matter what the requirements are because the DIB is full of companies that can't meet any of them. Like 10 requirements would be too much. 3 requirements for some of these companies would be too much. There are people out there saying, literally, we have a question in the queue. How can I, as a single person, meet these security requirements? You can't. You can't. There's no way that you would be able to navigate even a handful of security requirements, especially at the level of brilliant at the basics, without some really creative ways of doing it. And it's not free. It's not free, right? So this is the question is, okay, people can get their status after award. Are you going to revoke awards for people that don't achieve status after you give it to them? Yes or no? I mean, the department said it's too big of a risk for them to just willy-nilly hand out information to people that cannot prove that they can protect it. So are they going to change their policy position and say, we will give out data to people that we don't know if they can protect it? Is that what Congress wanted? That's the whole reason we're having this conversation.
Yep. Man, Andrew in the comments here, there was a time before food safety laws and your local restaurant didn't appreciate a clean kitchen either. The DIB is becoming a regulated industry because it has to be. That's a really good analogy, Andrew.
If you want to go down a really fun history rabbit hole, look up the history of seatbelt laws. Lots of interesting part. I mean, I just gave an interview on Fox News about this yesterday about is everybody's water working at your house right now? Is everybody's water pressure feeling good? Because like 7 to 12 states are having some pretty big water issues. Yeah. And man, what a fun story. I wrote an article on Lawfare 3 years ago about the last time the Iranians were jacking around with the water. And basically the government came down to saying, we don't have the authority to make you do anything. Please take your PLCs off the internet and change your default login credentials. And industry was like, no, we're not going to do that. And if you try to make us do it, we're going to sue you, which they did. And now here we are 3 years later, and everybody's going like, holy crap, they're logging in with default credentials to PLCs that are facing the internet. And you're like,
it's like we kind of saw this coming maybe a little bit,
it's just crazy, dude. It's just crazy. All righty, let's see here. Blue Siren says, if securing your own data is not valuable to you, then how can you be valuable to the Department of Defense? Great question. Your risk tolerance is willing to take all the risk, every risk. Yep. You have no consideration for risk whatsoever, either because your understanding of risk just isn't very good, or you just legitimately are willing to take that risk. The problem is it's not your risk to take. It's the government's risk tolerance that you're talking about. And so you're like, give me controlled data that is critical to some system. Not all the data is critical. No one's saying all the data is critical. But if you're putting precision parts on missiles launched from freaking satellites, right? And you're like, I don't have to do any cybersecurity whatsoever. And if you make me prove that I need to do the cybersecurity, then you're the problem here. Like, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's a little toxic. It's a little toxic.
Yep.
And it clearly is not a policy that the government, the taxpayer, anybody paying attention for 60 seconds would say is a good policy to have. It's just not.
It's not.
All righty, let's see here. Orion says 32 CFR 2002 defines CUI broadly. DoD defines certain types of information that require safeguarding out of the broad CUI definition. Will those become CUI basic again? Okay. 32 CFR 2002 says that anything that has an existing authority is considered to be CUI as an umbrella term. 32 CFR, the federal CUI regulation, does not define anything as CUI. It says all of these existing laws and regulations that say data needs to be protected, we're calling all of these controlled and classified information rather than calling them 126 different things. It's just all controlled, unclassified information. Controlled because there is an existing authority, unclassified because it's unclassified, right? If there were no authority, it's not controlled. It's just unclassified information, which, fun fact, back in the day in their proposed rule, they wanted to have CUI and UUI, uncontrolled unclassified information. So thank your lucky stars, we don't have to talk about UUI. So he says, DoD defines certain types of information that require safeguarding out of the broad CUI definition, FCI, SPD. No, they did not. FCI is not defined by the Department of Defense. FCI is the information that the well, let me get this right. The DoD's definition of federal contract information is not going to be the DoD's definition of federal contract information, because the FAR Council is going to take over what that means. But it's because the FAR 52-204-21 clause says this type of data needs to be protected, not because the DoD said that this type of data needs to be protected. So the FAR clause doesn't belong to the DoD. So the FCI term isn't something that the DoD created. It's affiliated with the DoD because they're the only ones that have been really talking about it for a couple of years, and the CMMC model revolves around that type of data, but they don't actually control it. So the question, will these become CUI basic again? So CUI basic is any type of data that has a controlling authority that doesn't specify individual requirements. It just says, here's a type of data, you have to protect it, without saying what protect means. DFARS 252-204-7012 says, we give you controlled information. Here's a bunch of requirements for protecting it. That means that any of that DoD CUI is not ever going to be CUI basic, because they specified things that you have to do. 171, FedRAMP equivalency, maintaining logs, all the rest of the response. 7012. Yeah, so they're not going to become basic again. None of the DoD CUI has ever been CUI basic because 7012 exists. Okay, let's get out of the weeds here for a second. Let's see. Pride One says, could the DOW increase the number of POAM allowed controls through a deviation?
This is a good question. How much power can be issued through a deviation? Like how much of a change can actually be put in place?
Here's the confusing part. The CMMC program is not a DFARS regulation, right? The CMMC program doesn't exist in the DFARS. It exists as a regulation at Title 32 of the Code of Federal Regulations. everything in the FAR and the DFARs exists in Title 48, right? So literally you're at the wrong Wendy's, right? So class deviations apply to acquisition regulations within the DoD's. Well, here we're talking about what the DoD can do. A class deviation applies to a class of acquisitions and says, instead of using this regulatory text, use this regulatory text instead while we wait to go through rulemaking. So the only thing that you can deviate from in terms of CMMC is the text of the 48 CFR CMMC rule. The 48 CFR CMMC rule is just the part of the DFARs that the contracting officer says do level 1, level 2, level 3. It doesn't say anything about assessments. It doesn't say anything about POAMs. It doesn't say anything about 171. It doesn't say any of the stuff that's related to the program. So the phased rollout, the POAMs, the scoring, the roles and responsibilities, the levels, all that stuff exists in a different title of the CFR. So this is why I'm saying that when the CIO comes out and says, we're changing requirements and we're changing the program and we're changing acquisition requirements and we're doing this, I'm like, that's like 3 or 4 different rulemaking efforts that have to happen across different undersecretaries' office simultaneously. CMMC 2.0 was a rulemaking effort run by a CMMC program office full of career bureaucrats who understand the rulemaking process and who were empowered by the CIO's office to pursue rulemaking. And they still had a 12-month gap between the program rule at 32 CFR and the 48 CFR rule under Duffy. So now you have, according to the rumors, pushed out, alienated, pissed off, and basically ignored everybody in the CMMC program office in lieu of whoever's on the CMMC review task force. Are they rulemaking experts? Like, I don't know. Who are those people? When you get done at 60 to 75 days, are you going to be able, through like some single fell swoop, get interim final rule waivers for more than one rule at a time through the, like, nothing about, if you know nothing else about rulemaking other than what we've talked about on this channel, you should just know that if I say they think that multiple simultaneously related rulemakings are going to go really, really fast, you're probably like, there's no way. There's no way that would happen. That's literally never happened before. And I just don't have a lot of confidence that people who hate the bureaucracy would know how to do that.
Well, okay, 48 CFR, you're saying the phase rollout is linked back to 32 CFR, which they can't issue a class deviation against. They can only do it under 48 CFR. How are they able to issue a suspend on phase 2 through a clause that, I'm not saying they can't control, but a clause that they can't apply that to?
Yep. It's a good question. Okay. It's a really good question. It's sort of like, you know, this ain't a political show, but it's sort of like issuing executive orders for things that you think should happen, and you just kind of ignore the way that things actually operate. And then a couple months later, maybe somebody comes around and slaps your hand and says, that's not how executive orders work. You just issued a statement that said, we're not doing phase 2. That's not how memos work. You can't do rulemaking through like stringing a series of memos together. But by the time the lawyers and the system and the bureaucracy catch up, your review is already done, which is probably why they said it's going to be a 60-day review, because it's probably going to take 60 days for like Congress and the attorneys to wake up and be like, that's not how this works. You can't just issue a memo to ignore a codified regulation. But like I said, we live in interesting times. You get a lot of people that, listen, I don't know, because I tried to reach out and they didn't ask me, but you get a lot of people who seemingly don't understand how this system works, declaring that they are doing and want to do certain things without conveying how that plan is actually going to play out in reality, which makes me think that you get to 60 to 75 days and we're going to get a lot of talk and not a lot of change, because they don't know how. Maybe I'm wrong, and you know, they have like a secret army of rulemaking ninjas that I've never heard of or met before, but there's just not a lot of people in that building, as big as it is, who know how to do this, because the lady who was doing all of the CMMC rulemaking retired.
Yeah.
Remember, listen to my words. The lady who does the rulemaking retired. I don't know. So we'll see. All righty, let's see here. Somebody said 12 states have been attacked by Iranian-linked hackers. Yeah, absolutely. And, this ain't AI-powered, Uber exploits. This ain't nation-state level multiple 0 days. They're logging in with default creds for PLCs that are attached to the internet. And over the years, the EPA has basically been reduced to begging industry to not do that. And the WFFO and like the Water Industries of America. If you guys want to go look at like the history of how this is like progressed forward, because it's CMMC in an alternate universe, but without the contractually enforceable mechanism. So imagine that the DoD just is kind of related to the defense industrial base, but nobody's on a contract. And now the DoD really needs you to do cybersecurity. You're like, okay, how are you going to make me? You don't have the
what power do you have?
You don't have an authority to do that. Well, now the water doesn't work. So great job, everybody. Now Congress is like, holy crap, we need to give all of these small water companies a bunch of money and like a bunch of assistance. And you're like, yeah, man. Yeah, that's what everybody told you to do a couple of years ago. All righty, let's see here. Does the affirming official still carry the same legal responsibility? Yeah. No, we talked about this in the first podcast right after the suspension. Nothing about CMMC has changed other than moving forward. No future DoD solicitations until further notice will require anything other than CMMC level 1 or level 2 self-assessment. That's it. The requirements you have to implement, the scoring values for those requirements, what's allowed on a POAM, who's responsible for the affirmations and attestations, the evidence required, uploading scores, all of that stuff is exactly the same. The only thing that they suspended was the idea that you would need to get a C3 PAO to verify your claim in order to win a contract award. That's it. Everything else, exactly the same. So that might save you $30,000, $50,000, $70,000 because you don't have to pay the C3 PAO to do it, but now you have to do all the work and you're making all the claims and you still have to implement all the requirements. I think, and I don't know if it changed while I was out, Daniel, but we sort of saw right before I left an initial split where there were companies, regardless of size, that I would classify as more mature, at least in their understanding of liability, saying, well, we still have the same requirements. We're still going to have to do all the implementation. And then other companies who, regardless of size, who I would say are less mature in their understanding of liability and more willing to take risks, saying, well, no one's going to come and check my work, so we're not going to do the implementation. And that was kind of the split.
Same kind of shakeout. Now, what was interesting is that on the podcast this week with Fernando, he was like, 88 is the new 110. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? He's like, you can actually go to SPRS and try and do something below an 88 and you can't, because that's the minimum score. So people who had negative 203s or 50s or, 87s, still problematic when you're actually trying to do your submission. And so I'm wondering if those small businesses will wake up, and if what Davies was saying about giving special treatment and additional points, if you will, to someone that is certified, I bet a lot of primes, inadvertent of phase 2 starting back up, will start again requesting that their subs get compliant because they don't want to miss out on that. Right. And so it's like this, if the DOW stops doing it, but they implement a scoring and weighted system for people that are certified, you better believe the primes are going to pick it back up with a timeline way more aggressive than the DOW actually had.
I mean, regardless of how you want to reform it, let's say the DoD magically marks everything that is CUI, and nothing that isn't CUI as not CUI. They, cater the requirements and they increase the POAMs and they do whatever and they make all these changes. They still have no ability to change the behavior of the primes. As long as they come out and say, this is the standard that you must meet, the primes will say, you must all meet this standard.
Yep.
And there's nothing that anybody is going to be able to do to prevent that behavior from happening because the primes are mitigating their risk. We're just delaying the inevitable here. So All right, TP 1837 says, most of this debate seems to be about the cost of actual CMMC assessment, not the cost of implementing the controls. Why aren't C3 PAOs publishing their fees openly so we know the exact assessment cost? Well, let me stop you at the first statement, because that's what allegedly people are saying. They're saying that the cost of CMMC is this exorbitant cost. But then when you actually ask them, hey, what costs are you talking about? They go, the cost of implementing CMMC. And like, there's no such thing as implementing CMMC. CMMC verifies that you have complied with DFAR 7012 or FAR 52-204-21. That's all it does. It doesn't prescribe additional requirements. It wanted to back in the day, and then we got rid of that part. Somebody tell the DoD CIO that we already tried that, right? So people are saying that it's the cost of CMMC and then conflating the cost of implementing requirements with the cost of assessment. Why don't C3 PAOs publish their fees openly? I mean, I don't know. Their fees vary quite a bit depending on the nature of the environment. We're not a C3 PAO, so I'm not sure.
Well, but the other side of it, does everyone else in the world for their private business publish all of their rates to the internet? Like, I mean, it's the same logic there, right? I'll say this, enough convincing information of redacted invoices given to the CIO to realize the price for a small business assessment every 3 years lands somewhere between 30 and 50K on average.
Apparently, you know, because they came out, especially the SBA came out and they were like, oh my God, CMMC is costing people $600,000. And apparently we heard through the grapevine that what people were telling the SBA was that if I go with full GCC high, full enterprise scope, no enclave whatsoever, no aggressive scoping to keep costs down, I have full-blown managed services completely outsourced to a third party entirely. They do all my documentation, all my configuration, all my management, all my stuff, an entire IT department, all the bells and whistles, that is what CMMC would cost you. That's not what CMMC requires you to do. Listen, we've been a business for almost 20 years. And for a long period of that time, we have specialized in helping people get into and stay in GCC high when that is the right use case. We will be the first people to tell you, you do not need GCC high in order to achieve CMMC status. You need GCC high if that's the right solution, because you have data sovereignty requirements under export control regulations that continue to exist regardless of the CMMC suspension. This would be like me going out and looking at the Porsche dealership down the road at the top of the line, whatever best Porsche I could possibly spend money on, and then turning around and being like, gosh, the auto market sure is expensive. This is crazy that cars all cost $1 million. No, they don't. No, they don't. You literally cannot find 7 cars that would cost that much if you go to the Subaru dealership, right? They just, you're not being honest in terms of comparing the cost here. I'm not saying that's you, TP 1837, but that's where the SBA got that number from. It's not a correct way of accounting the costs here. It's insane that they ran with that number, because it's like, did you guys come out in the press release and think people weren't going to ask where you got the number from?
Right.
But yeah, should they publish their fees openly? Sure, we should all publish our fees openly. Are we going to do that? Nobody's actually going to do that. So, okay. Blue Siren says, let me give you a scenario that recently came up. A DIB contractor that has to meet CMMC level 2 requirements has been knowingly using only CMMC level 1 requirements and self-assessment until DIB CAC shows up. Well, good luck.
Cliffhanger. Yeah.
Did they get a DIB CAC notice? I mean, I think there was a little bit of news that came out the other day where people were like, CMMC is suspended, but I got notices from DIB CAC that said that they want to show up and assess me. Yeah. Yeah. Apparently, DibCAC's got a lot of extra time on their hands because they're not going to be doing assessments for getting more C3 PAOs into the ecosystem. So they have more time to now show up and assess regular defense contractors, and that's not a fun time. Not a fun time. If we lost some of your comment here, Siren, go ahead and add it in there. Alrighty. Boy, right before the suspension announcement came out, The DoD CIO's post-quantum crypto strategy document got published, kind of flew under the radar. And on page 20, you can go read it for yourself. They were like, hey, we want to change CMMC requirements to include post-quantum crypto. Just like all the other requirements that they would like to change. Great idea. I don't disagree that that's a good idea. One problem, CMMC doesn't have requirements. CMMC is an assessment program. So do you mean that you're going to change DFAR 7012 requirements to include post-quantum crypto? What's the plan here? Either way, yet another signal from the DoD CIO's office that they want the requirements to go up. They don't want the requirements to go down. When requirements go up, costs go up. What's the plan? What's the plan here? Like,
get Congress to pay for it.
Man,
for all the small businesses in the world.
I mean, that would be an awesome plan if they come out and they were like, we want you to do this, we want you to do that, 55 burgers, 55 fries, 55 shakes. And then they were like, they have all these requirements, so now we need money. That would be a brilliant way of doing it that I don't think that they're actually planning to do, but they didn't rescind the strategy document. So, I mean, are we tossing that one on the pile too? Maybe. Costs are going to go up if they have their way.
It's pretty crazy.
All righty. What does the phase 2 suspension actually change for contractors? What do you think?
Honestly, not much. I mean, the only major requirement it suspended at all was the DOW will not be releasing solicitations that require certification. Now, if the CIO follows through on what she said, they might give preferential treatment to those with certifications in this interim phase, which means you probably want to be certified to be able to be considered for that. But outside of that, that's really it. You don't have to be certified to win a contract. That's it. You have to meet the minimum requirements of 88 of 110. You got to meet the whole FedRAMP thing. You got to do the full DFAR 7012 thing. If you have export control, you should definitely do that because that's a 7048 clause. Like, it really didn't change anything for contractors. Like, it delayed the inevitable, but even if you look at how much it delayed you paying $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 if you're a small business in assessment costs every 3 years. Everything else it still requires you to do today and put a minimum scoring. Yeah,
didn't suspend your export control requirements.
It really didn't do too much there.
All right. Is the assessment really the biggest cost of CMMC, or is implementation where companies spend most of their money?
Implementation by far. I'm going to say it's a 10x multiple almost. Implementation to assessment costs for most organizations. Like, I did a poll. Go ahead.
We heard stories about people that were getting assessments done in like 1 to 3 days because their environment just wasn't all that big. But it's going to cost more money to set up even a small environment than it's going to be to run a partially automated assessment.
I did run an interesting poll on my LinkedIn this week looking at if SBA were to issue CMMC 7012 loans. And I did different tiers of them, right? 0 to 25,000, 25 to 50, so forth and so on. Pretty much every single person that responded to the poll wanted a loan over a 10-year payback period over $250,000 to cover the implementation costs at 11.75% interest.
And you know,
so
that is
because people are realizing the real cost is with implementation. That's where my money goes.
Yeah. And the fact that people are saying we need money for implementation is why the program was created, because you have already technically been paid by the government because you said that you did the implementation. So sure, like, come out with the loans, but is everybody getting the loans? What about the people that already spent their money on the loans? Like, this is student loan forgiveness, right?
That's right.
And this is an argument really looking through the responses in the SBA listening session and what we've heard from the DoD CIO listening session. The only really new policy question that is being asked by people in these listening sessions is, what are you going to do for the people who did things right? Small business burden, cost, FedRAMP, this, that, or the other, POAMs, blah, blah, blah. All of that stuff has been brought up before. All of that stuff has been addressed before. Really, the only new policy question is, now that you have a large number of companies that did what you said they needed to do and spent the money, now what's the plan? because when everybody was not doing what they were supposed to do, that wasn't really an issue. But now you pulled the rug out from under the people who were doing what they were supposed to do. What's the answer for them in 60 days, right? Because are you going to give a bunch of money to people who haven't done it yet and not to the people who have done it? It's a dicey question. I don't know how they're going to get out there. This is a good one to end on. If we're already compliant with NIST SP 800-171, are we in a good position regardless of what happens next? Yes.
Yes-ish. And I say this because I see it all the time. People implement these controls on non-FedRAMP clouds that have CUI on them. So I will thread the needle and say, you've probably done really good. But if you put the controls in the wrong places, they don't count. And so that's the conundrum that we see a lot of. People implement on commercial clouds all the time because they just see 171 or they just see the DoD assessment methodology. They just see this one document, even in private contracts that they have with their primes, it just calls out 171. And it's like, just be careful, right? But if you've done it and you've done it correctly, yes, you are in a fantastic position.
Yeah. And I think, one of the very common pieces of feedback in these listening sessions that I've seen is people go, the sovereign cloud solutions are too expensive. Let us use commercial cloud solutions. What you're asking is, can I put export controlled data into a commercial cloud? That is not a question that CMMC can answer. That is not a question that CMMC has any responsibility over. You are not allowed to put export controlled data into non-sovereign clouds. That's an ITAR problem. It's not a CMMC problem. CMMC exposed this problem. CMMC is being blamed for this problem. But I mean, do you think that the DoD is going to come out? Do you think the lawyers at the Department of Defense are going to come out and be like, yes, contractors, feel free to take our export controlled technical information and just throw it in commercial Microsoft clouds? Like, there's no way that is going to be an answer that they're going to come out with. It's just not.
Nope.
It's just not. So yeah, I mean, we talked about this beforehand. A lot of people are like, hey, we're going to do CMMC level 1, more power to you. If you're going to be dealing with export controlled information, you have requirements that are outside of even DFAR 7012. So just be aware. But in general, yes, the requirements in SB 800-171 put you in a good position as long as you've considered all of the things that orbit around 800-171 as a defense contractor. Remains to be seen if the DoD is eager to change those requirements. Definitely check out the Brilliant on the Basics podcast that we did on Thursday. We got plenty of other ones to go into. Here's a question for you that I have, Daniel, before we leave. How is the DoD going to estimate the cost of OT cybersecurity requirements if they've never estimated that cost before?
I mean, if you look at the CMMC level 3 cost estimates, which is a small uplift, plus the OT equipment meeting all 110 plus additional 24 controls, we're into the tune of millions of dollars for a small business. Like,
this is what I'm saying. How are they going to explain it?
OT for most businesses, especially small businesses with very light enterprise footprint for their IT infrastructure, are going to spend probably double, triple, quadruple, 10x on their OT. Because if you look at the systems, CMMC level 3 was nice. And what I mean by that is it said you could use intermediary devices, kind of front load your OT to absorb the control requirements, right? Like looking at Brilliant at the Basics, which again, all good things. These are things that are good security practices. But if you have to apply them to legacy OT equipment, which 99% of the world runs off of, you're going to have a really big problem without without additional clarity around how to scope that implementation of controls.
Yeah. Good luck with the 2-week magical compliance enclave solution providers out there when you go tell them, hey, can you do continuous monitoring for my OT environment? Be like, no. There's like 4 companies on the planet that could do that.
Yeah.
So there you go. If you guys aren't familiar, for the security practitioners out there, I mean, go read the 10 OT cybersecurity requirements that allegedly the DoD would like, because apparently there's going to be an amazing job market here very soon for everybody to. You thought they didn't know about IT security? I don't know. What do you guys think in chat? Am I taking crazy pills? Was I on the road too long? Was I living out of my Subaru for too long in the Pacific Northwest hunting for Sasquatch? Are they going to be able to explain what their plan is in 60 days without contradicting everything that they said on July 13th? I don't know. Maybe the mountain air was too fresh and I need to come back down to earth, but I don't know how they're going to do it. But we're going to see. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. It's Friday. We're going to do this every Friday. You can find us on LinkedIn. You can find us on YouTube. If we didn't get to your question, we'll add it to the queue. We got a bunch of other stuff in the queue. Keep up with us for any of the news that's going on, because there's not a really reliable source for where to get this information. It's all kind of rumor at this point until September-ish, I guess. So make sure you like and subscribe. You can find us on summit7.us. You can find our blogs over there. Shoot us DMs. My DMs are open again now that I'm back from vacation. And we'll see you next week.
See y'all.